control the vertical.
Welcome to Anthologic, the TV anthology podcast. I am your host, Mark. Anthologic is a podcast dedicated to exploring the good, the bad, and the odd of horror, science fiction, and the best of mystery suspense anthology shows and series on TV. Join me as we slip through the cracks of reality to approach the extremes of experience, where we can peruse the stories and art of a sinister fairground of strange and wonderful rides. And now we go on to the show that is the focus of this particular episode. Welcome to this episode of Anthologic with your host Mark. Today we are covering Night Gallery. We are on to Season 2, Episode 7. This had two stories and it aired on the 3rd of November 1971. The two stories are called Midnight Never Ends and Brenda. Now, these are both quite interesting stories. They're fairly treated in a fairly serious way. There's no lightheartedness about them whatsoever. And they're kind of interesting. The first doesn't quite work as well as it should because it's kind of riffing on stuff that Serling has done in the past and we've seen in the past, certainly in the Twilight Zone, and its sort of setup and construction and execution. And the second is much more ambitious. In fact, they're both quite ambitious, but it doesn't quite succeed because of the limitations of the budget of TV and stuff like that. But it's still a very interesting and well executed episode. Right, the first one, Midnight Never Ends, was written by Rod Serling, but apparently extensively rewritten by someone else who you can kind of tell the idea's Serling's, but the dialogue isn't. It isn't as snappy as Serling's usual sort of stuff. But the idea is there. So Jean-Luc Schwartz, I really don't know how to pronounce that. He's directed quite a few segments for us before. It's spelt SZWARC. And I knew him from directing director of Jaws 2, though I've never seen Jaws 2. I just knew that was the guy that kind of got tired with it. And it kind of makes sense when you think about it, because both Spielberg, who directed Jaws 1, and this man who directed Jaws 2 worked in the Night Gallery, so they're going to be a similar age, similar sort of sensibility and so on. So I wonder if he got the job because of that connection with Spielberg in the past. I don't know. And as I say, it was initially written by Serling, but it was rewritten extensively. It stars Robert F. Lyons as a sort of Marine who's hitchhiking, and Susan Strasberg, who is probably famous for a lot of TV in the 70s. Actress, she was, you'd recognise her face if you saw her, I think, if you know American 70s TV. Essentially, a Marine is hitchhiking, a woman picks him up, and they have a strange, stilty conversation where they kind of know what each other's about to say. It's kind of they've already lived through this. There's massive deja vu going on, and they kind of... it's like they've done this day many, many times. It's a Groundhog Day kind of situation. It's very odd. I have to say, the segment opens with Rod Serling talking about what's going on, and the picture is quite an interesting one because it is a confused looking Rod Serling in shadows, which is like, what's going on here? But I think that's a major hint into how this story plays out, actually, and they kind of don't know what they're doing, and they're driving along this dark highway. You don't see anything other than the dark and some road signs, and they sort of saying stuff like, well, we're going to pull in at a cafe in a minute and it's going to be shut and the owner's going to be angry with us. And sure enough, they do pull in at a cafe, even though the woman says, oh, I pull in every time. And the man says, well, don't, just keep driving. But she does. When they pull up, the door's open. And she says, oh, it changes a little every time. There's also a moment where a little handgun falls out of her handbag and the man picks it up and says, what are you doing this? And she's saying, I don't know. They're also kind of confused about their past. They don't understand. They can't remember stuff about where they've come from or their history or anything like that. They just know about now. And they kind of realise they're embedded in the now rather than the past. And they're kind of doomed to keep reliving this. So there's a couple of possible explanation for this. It might be they're in hell. It might be they're living in some sort of weird time loop thing, or there's various stuff. And indeed, when they go in through the thingy, the man in there is kind of old and angry with them, and is about to close, and sort of makes it clear they're not that welcome, even though he does serve them. They notice he cheats. They say just before they look at the cards, he's been playing solitaire and he cheats. And when they go look at the board, it is solitaire, and there is a black 9 on a black 8 on a black 9. For example. And even there's even like weird cultural references, like, "Hey, you hippies." He goes, "Well, I'm wearing the uniform." He goes, "Yeah, kids coming in all the time in uniforms. They're still hippies." And it's kind of weird because they're obviously not hippies. But he kind of questions them. And then they mention a cop's going to come in a minute and start challenging us. And he does, and starts asking for IDs. But when they challenge both the barkeeper and the cop to remember something about their own past, they all get confused. And in the meantime, there's a weird noise from above them, like a weird tapping, which presages a typewriter. It's kind of pretty obvious where this is coming from. And they're kind of going on, and they kind of get driven to do things. I'm going to do this, and I can't help myself. And in the end, the cop kind of... the man pulls out the gun in his pocket and the cop kind of shoots him. And then it kind of fades out and fades in. And we see a writer writing this story. So obviously they're characters in a story. And they kind of say we're puppets in someone else's play. They actually say something like that. And he says something. And this writer is the Marine. Basically, this man is the Marine. And then his wife, Ruth, starts asking him, like, well, where's the Marine come from? He goes, I got it from an old TV show. And he actually, the character does talk about during the episode about knowing about Dodge City, or one of those old Western towns. So it's very odd. And then when we see Ruth, it is the woman who was driving. And she says, oh, you've written a bit different time. Why she got a gun? And he goes, I don't. And the writer says, I don't know. And she says, I thought you writers all had a plan when you said this. He goes, the good writers do. He's kind of being ironic. And she kind of says, maybe she had a gun because she killed her husband because he kept leaving her alone at night. So there's a hint there that all is not well in this marriage, maybe. But she says it in a kind of joking way. And then she goes upstairs and he starts writing again, and it all starts again. So that's the story. Midnight Ever Ends. So I think this has been done a few times as a concept of people realising their characters in someone else's story, at least twice in the Twilight Zone, as far as I remember. I've probably done it in other anthology shows. Anyway, it's done here. So it's kind of predictable. You kind of know what's coming. We've seen this kind of thing before, certainly from Serling. But you know what? I quite liked it. I like the fact it was kind of surreal. The set was kind of deliberately, apparently, half done, so it was almost like a dreamlike thing. And it reminded me a bit of, there was a Star Trek episode where they had to do this because of budgetary constraints, called Spectre of the Gun in season 3, when the budgets were severely curtailed. They had to sort of do them in Spectre of the Gun. Kirk and co find themselves in near the OK Corral, facing off the Earp twins, but the town's kind of half formed, and they kind of work out in that aliens that are sort of sorting this out are kind of taking images from their own mind and doing it, but they don't know the full images, so they're doing what they can. So it gives it a dreamlike quality. And this, a particular segment in this show, is the same. You kind of feel like it's a dreamlike thing or a non-real thing. So it kind of works. I quite like this one, despite its, we knew the twist ending. In fact, it was given away right at the beginning when we see the picture of the confused Rod Serling. That it's something to do with writers. It's like that. Second segment is a little more ambitious and quite interesting, and it's called Brenda. It was directed by Alan Reisner and written by Matthew Howard. And it's got several actors in, but the main one is called Laurie Prange, is the actress. She's playing the titular Brenda. Now, Brenda is a strange little girl. I have to say, the actress, who is older than the role as presented, I think she's supposed to be 12 in this, but she's clearly older. But they've got her in pigtails, and it kind of works. The energy she brings to it is that of a 12-year-old, so it kind of continues to work. She's wandering around this island on her own, and one, I don't know, friend, person she knows of her own age, is making a huge sandcastle on the beach, and Brenda just goes and tramples it, and she's a strange, lonely little girl, really, who seems polite and okay around adults, so they're kind of confused, but she's kind of a little childish, I guess, with other children, and spiteful. It's presented as like attention seeking, really. Anyway, she goes off and wanders this island on her own because no one will be friends with her. And she finds this weird creature, this thing, this kind of, it looks like a man dressed as a swamp creature. It's almost like, it looks like a scaled down version of the thing in Godzilla vs. the Smog Monster is how it looks. It's kind of a weird lump of, I don't know, moss and roots and things just moving around as a lump. But it has got arms, articulate arms. And she sees it, and she starts she's frightened a bit at first, then she's a bit more playful. She said, "Come catch me." And I think she deliberately kind of leads it into like this quarry where it falls down and can't get out. And she sort of talks to it while it's there, but she's not frightened. But then she kind of suggests where it can get out. She kind of guides it so it climbs out again, and she runs home. And then she kind of starts obsessing about it at home, and she goes downstairs in the night while everyone's asleep and opens the front door and goes back to bed. And sure enough, the creature comes in, and the parents and neighbours come and try and fight it. They drive it back with fire and drive it back to the pit, and then they throw stones on it and cover it so it's stuck. And then it cuts to like the next summer. They leave the island the next day, so she can't see it. She goes back to the quarry, down to where it's buried. There's still this huge pile of rocks, and starts talking to it and starts saying, maybe you're ready to be born. Maybe I'm ready to be born. And it's kind of an interesting idea. Now, this was based on a short story that was in an EC comic written by Margaret Sinclair called Brenda, and it's kind of apparently a quite direct lift from that. And it's kind of weird and odd, and the music works really well. Laurie Prange gives a great performance as this girl. I have to say, really good, really effective. But it's done on the cheap. They use a lot of Vaseline on the lens to give it a kind of weird, surreal, sort of floaty feel. And it works. I quite like it. It just looks a little cheap compared to what they were trying to do. And it doesn't resolve in an easy or obvious way. Well, it kind of, I don't know if it's obvious, but basically she's kind of in love with this weird monster thing and feels like they're a pair. It presages other films where women kind of fall in love with monsters, and we're talking about stuff like Possession, or more recently something like The Shape of Water, where women who are lonely or not satisfied with their lives kind of fall in love with something otherworldly, and this kind of presages all of those. So it's a pretty interesting episode. Very solid. I like these weird, ambitious Night Gallery segments. I have to say, this was ambitious, if nothing else, and it kind of works well. And they're playing it straight here. They're not playing it for laughs, so it's pretty cool. Okay, I think I'll end it there. But before I go, can I just ask, is anybody out there?
I'm not.
We now return control of your television set to you until next week at this same time, when the control voice will take you to